committee, I think it's time to start. Looks like we're back up. Are we live? Okay. I'm going to go ahead. The only thing on the agenda today is a hearing on SB 124. Before I open up the proponent section of the bill, we've already had a briefing on the bill yesterday. I know that Representative Dotson has a comment still and a question. Are there, I'm going to have him ask his question or make his comment, and if there are other questions after reading the bill, if you have other questions for either Representative Burrows or for the reviser, we'll start there. Representative Dotson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I shared this with Representative Burrows just before the meeting. Yesterday, we had a question on page 5 about these metropolitan statistical areas. And just by chance, I got a note from the City of Manhattan. This was a recommendation from the Metropolitan and Micropolitan Statistical Work Group sent to OMB. And the proposal is, without a defined date, that the current metropolitan statistical area of 50,000 and above move to 100,000 and above. They then establish a new definition for those 50,000 to 100,000 of micropolitan statistical area. And then furthermore, right at the end, they say areas with an urban area population of between 10,000 and 49,999 also would continue to qualify as micropolitan statistical areas as they did under the 2000 and 2010 standards. So I think with Representative Burrows, we probably need to have some kind of language that ties whatever might happen there to our bill.
Can you tell us the reasoning for changing the definition? You said something about federal funding to the cities if they're defined differently.
There is no, according to this, the OMB states that there is no tie to funding, which is probably true for OMB, but not necessarily true for other federal granting and organizations.
And did you work with research on, did you give this to research?
Give it to Charles, yes.
Charles, okay. Charles, do you have anything to add to that, or can you help explain it?
Chairman, members of the committee, no. I think that pretty much covers it. If you go to the OMB website, there are a couple of very large spreadsheets that list out the metropolitan statistical areas, and like Representative mentioned, it's currently it's an urbanized area of at least 50,000 or more. So I don't really have anything to add with respect to that particular question.
So for you or either Eddie, making this change, does it make any significant change to the bill as far as how the bill responds or how they qualify?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
If we're simply changing the definition, will it affect any other part of the bill as far as how cities may qualify for different things?
I'd want to go through the bill and check that. I don't think so, but it seems to me that metropolitan statistical area is mentioned in one other spot. I just can't remember where, so I'd want to check it.
Okay, if you could get back to us on that, that'd be great, because we want to make sure we don't damage the rest of the bill by trying to help part of it. Are there any other questions for Reviser or Rep. Burrows? Christy, I want to call you Christy. Representative Williams.
I know, don't you hate it when you can't remember someone's names? All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is, and this is going to be a refresher question, it's on page 12 when we exclude the automobile dealers. Of course, we're always glad that that's the case because of what happened when it wasn't the case. But my question is, what about other destination-based sales tax, like a boat, or anything that would be tagged where property tax would go back to the home city or county? Would that pick up that in this bill, or is it just only for automobiles?
Charles?
As I recall, I think that was just with respect to retail automobile dealers.
Chuck, or Charles, what other destination items would that include besides boats? Is there anything else? Airplanes, but I don't think we sell too many of those. Do you know?
No, I'm sorry, I'd have to look into that. I don't know.
Trailers? Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and open the proponent section of testimony. We'll start with the Department of Commerce, David Sofer.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. David Sofer, Legislative Policy Director, Kansas Department of Commerce. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Really quickly, before we start on this, I just wanted to touch on Representative Dodson's point on the MSAs. We were made aware of this a couple of weeks ago. The Department of Budget on the federal side had proposed this change. The administration is going to try to address this and speak out against it. It would have some unfortunate negative impacts, especially on the city of Manhattan in that area. So we are trying to address that part accordingly and hopefully convince our federal folks not to move forward with that proposal. But just specifically to get back to the Star Bonds point, I think Representative Burrows did a great job of kind of explaining the history of it, so I'm going to skip that part of my testimony. The only thing I want to make sure we address is, so Star Bonds financing must constitute less than 50% of the total project costs. I just think that's important to remember here. We did have a bill last year, HB 2529, was introduced in January 2020. We did do a hearing on it. We had some momentum. It looked like it was going to get done, and then unfortunately kind of COVID hit. So we extended the program 1 year through the appropriations bill that was passed with the budget and to be able to get us to this point. Most of the reforms here were covered last year, but we did do some kind of deep dive into it. And so just to make sure that we were good with it, we wanted to make sure that this was a bill that we were happy with, that we thought addressed many of the concerns with the program itself, that this focused on making sure that we get efficient and effective projects, making sure that we are addressing the community's needs and making sure we also are addressing the state's needs as well. So I want to go through kind of each reform in this and kind of give you the thought process behind it so you can understand. And then, of course, at the end, I'd be happy to take any questions. Just to start, you know, the biggest piece of this, in our opinion, is the third-party feasibility study. So, you know, when the developer currently wants to do a project, that developer will pay for the feasibility study. It's at the developer's discretion, and then it's provided to the department. We feel that there is an inherent conflict of interest there. So what the department would like to do to be able to take that conflict of interest out and make sure that the state is getting the best possible feasibility study is the department would have a, you know, have a selection of about 6 different, you know, 5-6 companies that could possibly do the feasibility study, make sure there are no conflicts of interest between that company and developer, pick that company, and then the developer would pick up the cost. I think that would help eliminate any influence a developer might have on the study and with respect to the data that we're getting, and also would lead to more accurate financial and visitor projections. So as part of that feasibility study, they're going to have to detail, part of it will be, you know, how they're tracking visitors. We think that's incredibly important. It's something I know that was discussed yesterday. It's important for us to know how many visitors are coming, what the projections are, both from, you know, out of state and 100 miles away, but also making sure that we continue to have those updates each year so we know how that project is doing and are they truly meeting the goals of what this program is about. Also, as part of that feasibility study, there will be ROI. There will also be kind of what they would call a cannibalization type look. So it'd be regional effects on you know, what the project will have, the regional effects on both the kind of the city, the county, the nearby cities. and also the statewide impact as well. We think those are incredibly important because we need to be able to measure, are we truly bringing in new dollars into our state, or are we simply taking them from, another region nearby? Certainly if we're just reorganizing dollars that are from nearby regions, that's not really what we want to do. We want to be able to really create attractions and destinations that bring in new dollars into our state and impact our state in a positive manner. So the second one and I could cover this, city and developers will be required to submit visitor tracking plan. We do think this has to be added to statute, so we could begin to enforce this point. Some cities do a great job at this. Excuse me, others are just a little bit lacking on some of that data, and we want to make sure that going forward, these projects have the visitor tracking plan in place. We'll be able to know how many visitors are coming and be able to present that data to anybody that's interested. So the third one, and this touches on the MSA, I think this is the only item that's related to MSA, so if we need to, we can always adjust it or make sure that it's MSAs as of currently, but the goal here really is that if you're a bigger city, and you've got the ability to build around that project, you shouldn't have a project where the retail is nowhere near the attraction. At the end of the day, if the attraction is able to bring visitors, it should be able to also support the retail behind it. There have been a couple of projects where they're what they would call non-contiguous districts, where the attraction is on one side and then the kind of retail is on the other side of the city. We want to be able to make sure that cities have the attraction and the retail around it, so it truly is a Star Bonds district, and it's an area that we can build on. The next one that we have is capital investment. So this would be raising currently by statute, and this was last addressed in 2006, capital investment and annual sales threshold would be raised from $50 million to $75 million for urban projects. This was set a decade ago. This sets a higher threshold that, to be honest with you, is tougher to achieve, and that's kind of the goal here. We want to make sure that we have, the bar is raised, and we're looking for unique projects that have a high ceiling for our state that will bring the most value. To be honest with you, we looked at it post-COVID-19, and the challenges that'll come with retail as we kind of begin to hopefully get consumer confidence back and try to get back to normal. But we still very much like the idea that there will be a very high ceiling in order to be able to get a Star Bonds project done, and that's something that I think will benefit our state. It'll be able to set the bar at a much higher level for these projects, and I think that'll be a really good thing for all involved. The next one, and this is another important piece, and to be honest with you, this came from a lot of feedback, both I know from folks on this committee and others. Cities and or developers will be required to submit a summary of community engagement and support of the project as part of their application. So we've heard from a couple, folks, or I should say from a couple of projects from various people on both the positive and negative side, or pro or against it, the project itself, that we are not properly accounting for a community's feelings on a project. So we think it's important that the community itself, along with all involved, kind of begin to provide a summary from beginning to end, showing all engagement involved, showing hopefully, how many folks were supportive, in person, how many were against it, and be able to provide a full review of that process that would provide transparency both to the legislature and to the public as far as whether a community truly supports a project. We think that's incredibly important. Certainly, we're not looking to kind of ram through projects that communities don't support. And I think it'll be a really good piece for us to get more acclimated with being able to be there when cities are having these hearings and being able to listen in person to kind of get that feedback immediately. The next one relates to existing businesses. So 10% of each dollar of sales tax for all existing businesses will be taken off the increment and go back to the taxing entities. So when there are current businesses that get put into a Star Bonds district, once that project is approved and you look at the last 12 months, that's the baseline, all the increase in in sales tax goes towards paying off these bonds. So we want to be able to do is that if there's truly a benefit, then the state should be able to reap part of that. So 10% off that increment sales tax would actually go back to the taxing entities. and that would get some upside to the state immediately in their coffers as opposed to having to wait till when the bonds fully pay off. There are also two modifications to what star bonds could be used for, and I think this one was touched on yesterday, and I want to make sure we kind of explain why this is important. The first one is eligibility should be extended to business facilities with potential to attract sizable out-of-state visitation. So this is the business headquarters piece. So why put business headquarters into star bonds? Well, I'll give you a perfect example. If you look at the Dairy Farmers of America in Wyandotte County, that brings tens of thousands of visitors a year. They log it. They could tell you where their visitors are coming from. They also want it to be located near the Village West Star Bonds District. They love the idea that there's hotels nearby, there's restaurants, there's places, there's for their visitors to stay nearby and, you know, stay local, buy local. That was incredibly important to them, and that's why they picked that specific location. We think there's an opportunity to build specifically, again, I want to make sure that we emphasize this. This is not going to be, an item that is used quite often. This is probably going to be a rare item that we use in star bonds, but if there's an opportunity to get a major headquarters into our state and build around it and provide them with the opportunities they are looking for by making sure that we build around that headquarters, and that brings them in, this would be such an incredibly valuable tool to our state. It brings new visitors, new dollars. Again, we're talking about headquarters that brings in tens of thousands of visitors a year. Those are new dollars into our state. That's such incredibly valuable piece. In fact, if you look at what Wyandotte County and that Village West area is doing now, you have Cerner, you have Dairy Farmers of America, and you have Urban Outfitters. So even though Cerner and Urban Outfitters wouldn't qualify under this, there's a reason why they're locating where they are. They want that major development around their business. They find it incredibly valuable. This could be such an incredibly important tool with being able to bring new dollars into our state. And then the last piece that I'll touch on as far as in the bill with our modifications was the rural-only component, which was mentioned yesterday. So this would be, the investment floor would be at $3 million. This would allow for vertical building and rehabilitation. It sets a capital investment floor that reflects realistic expectations with our rural counties and rural communities for a project. There's also a pay-as-you-go option that would not involve bonding. So, if a developer would like to simply pay for it out of pocket, the cap for that would be $10 million, and then they would get reimbursed similar to the method of a star bond and bondholders do as well. Lastly, I have to touch on one amendment that was added by the Senate during this debate. I think it was a couple weeks ago when they passed it. So currently, the amendment that they added and the way it's written states, no state or local government official shall benefit financially, either directly or indirectly, from any star bonds project. The vagueness on that is very problematic. For example, if a legislator has a family member whose property value increases because of a nearby star bonds district, or if you have a family member that's located in a star bonds district, your family now benefited directly because of star bonds, and you would be in violation of the law. Or if you have a spouse who works for a company that is working on or is located near a star bonds district, even if you're not working directly, you're in violation of the law. There are plenty of other examples. I know there are going to be multiple speakers that are going to be following me that will bring you their examples of why this is problematic. I think it's so incredibly important for this committee to address this issue. I leave it up to the will of the committee whether you believe something belongs in there or not. If you do, we would probably point you to language that currently exists under peak statute. So just for example, so peak statute states, on or after July 1st, 2014, no member of the legislature, either elected or appointed, shall, while in office and within 3 years after expiration of such legislator's term of office, avail such person of the benefits available under the provisions, and then it lists the statutes and the various provisions in peak, so that way you cannot benefit directly from the program. So if you wanted to come up with something like that for state officials, local officials, if you even wanted to put my name in there because I talk about this program every year, feel free, go for it. I say that just half jokingly, but the honest point is that, there's a way to address what it is they were after. I think this has to be done. Otherwise, pretty much almost everybody in this building, at the Department of Commerce, whether you had to do something with star bonds or not, every member of a city gets put into a very difficult point where they all might be in violation of the law. And so I don't think that's something that was intended for, and I hope it's something that the committee could address. In conclusion, the thing I would tell you about this bill is that this bill was the long, hard work of, getting feedback and trying to make sure we implement a program that's efficient and effective. We took the feedback from both this committee on multiple occasions over the course of the last few years, from the Senate, from communities, and we really tried to address a bill that would provide meaningful change to the program. From our end of view, this is the first time, as far as we could tell, that serious reforms for the program have been proposed. This is something that we feel has the opportunity to change and affect the program for the better. This is why we continue to ask for a 5-year sunset date, because this would provide a message to our folks that Kansas is still open for business. But at the same time, we are going to be open, we are going to be transparent, and we are going to meet the needs of our communities and those that are interested in getting more information about the projects and the process involved in making sure that we are doing everything we can when we analyze these programs to avail ourselves with the data to know that new dollars are coming into our state. And with that, I'll be happy to summarize and end here and take any questions when the time's right.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. We've got a few questions, starting with Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, the piece on the headquarters still just bothers me. So I get it if they want to move a headquarters into an existing Star Bonds area, I guess. I mean, headquarters may want to move in because there's attractions, because there's hotels or whatever. I'm still just not sure that making it so that if I'm understanding right, making it so that the headquarters is the attraction. I'm just not sure that is what we're looking for. Can you?
Sure.
Am I misreading that, or?
Sure. So again, I would tell you that there are unique circumstances where headquarters are indeed the attraction. Again, let's take the Dairy Farmers of America, for example. If not for Dairy Farmers of America, those tens of thousands of visitors do not come to our state. They come here for business. They stay at least one night. Those are new dollars that are coming into our state that go in to support hotels, restaurants, various other things to do if they end up staying the weekend. That's the goal of Star Bonds, is we want to bring new dollars into our state. Again, as I would point to my remarks earlier, this is not necessarily going to be the norm. These are going to be unique opportunities that we look at where major headquarters of companies are looking to move. They look at Kansas, they like the location, they want development around it. If the developer and the headquarters come together, they've got a great project. This is something that we want to be able to do. We do think there's at least one possibility out there with a company we're talking with currently. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose that name at the moment, but those are things that I think we're looking at with unique situations that we can build around. But it is important to note, there are headquarters out there that do indeed contribute to tourism and the local economy just by the amount of visitors that come in.
Okay, but just building the headquarters is not going to pay for the sales tax, though. So I mean, you've got to build the hotel, the attractions around it, and you have to do that fairly quick. That actually has to be part of the whole package, right?
Correct.
Otherwise, I mean, just building headquarters wouldn't do it.
Correct, but it's no different than, sorry, let me move this a little back. Correct, it's no different than any other attraction, right? I mean, you can't just build an attraction immediately and expect to be able to repay back those bonds. In most cases, you have to build the retail around it. So those two things have to occur together, and they occur together over time. It doesn't necessarily happen within a few months. Some of those projects, in order to build out, do take a year, a couple of years before those projects are what they would call placed into service. So That's no different than any other Star Bonds project, to be honest with you.
Yes and no. I mean, if you build an attraction that is actually going to generate sales tax money, it may not be able to pay for it on its own, but it's going to start the process. I'm not going to vote against it simply for that. I'm just still, that bothers me a little bit. So I don't know. We can maybe talk about it more.
Always happy
We'll
to.
see how the others on the committee think. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To piggyback on that, the examples you used are office places that built at or near a current Star Bond project, and they did that for a reason. But those areas are already bound up for the next 20 years to pay for bonds, so how would you do that if they moved into a Star Bond district? Where would the revenue come from to pay for the new Star Bonds?
So again, if we're talking about new Star Bonds districts, right? So this would be a new business headquarters that moves into a new Star Bonds district. So that means new retail is being built, and that would be paying over the course of 20 years. So I guess, I don't know if that addresses your question or I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, I guess I was just confused by your examples, so caused a little.
Sure. So
was
if
in-
I may, the reason why I brought up those examples is I want to be able to show the importance of what people want when they have these major business headquarters and they bring in thousands of tourists, business tourists every given year. They want to be around development where they have hotels nearby, they have restaurants nearby, they have things to do nearby, so folks are not necessarily inconvenienced traveling all across town to get where they're staying. And so that was the example of why Dairy Farmers of America picked here and why we believe it's important to have this provision in Star Bonds that would allow us in unique situations to potentially implement this part of the program.
Okay, and then if they build near existing hotels, for example, how does the baseline work? I mean, because most of the time, hotels are generally full. And so sales tax from those rooms, only the increase would count. So how would that work?
Sure. So again, if
Proposing
they,
building new hotels, and if you are those going to be funded by Star Bonds also?
So part of the reason why we want to be able to implement a cannibalization study is we want to be able to see if there is a negative impact on businesses nearby. Certainly, if there is enough support in an area for a second hotel without hurting the original hotel, then that's great, and that new sales tax would be able to be used to pay off for the bond. In your specific case, if a hotel is generally full and they've maxed out, there would be no increment, and thus none of that money on the initial hotel, if they were in the Star Bonds district, would go towards paying off the bond.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, the first question I have is about layering. So would any of these businesses could they also qualify for, like, let's say, HPIP? I know they could qualify for local business incentives, but could they also qualify for state incentives?
Generally speaking, we have not used Star Bonds and other programs together. In theory, there's nothing that prevents it via statute, but I do not necessarily see this being used as a program where we would layer state incentives.
Okay, but they could. There's no prohibition.
Correct.
Right now. So, okay. The next question is, I want to come back to the destination-based taxes. If I go shop and I buy furniture at, Nebraska Furniture Mart in a Star Bonds district, does that sales tax, is it captured for the Star Bond district, or does it go back, if it is shipped to my house, normally it would go back to my community? Which would it be?
That's a good question. I'd have to double check with Department of Revenue specifically on shipments and how that sales tax part works.
So we would probably need to stipulate in this bill if this committee had a preference.
Again, without knowing what the rule is with Department of Revenue, I'd have to double check to see how it currently works. And then I could be able to provide you an update on that.
Okay, that would be great, because the only thing I see currently is the automobiles. But I think there's a whole host of other things that when they're shipped to your home, then that money would normally go back to those small communities across Kansas. Also, when we're talking about the corporate headquarters, and the representative to my left gave an excellent argument for it yesterday. However, my question about that is, would there ever be an instance would you would have a corporate headquarters that would be built and approved for a star bond because let's say maybe their capital investment exceeds the threshold, which is quite expansive, but they couldn't, if that were all it was, they could not have any type of retail sales with that unless they included builds around it. So how would that part satisfy the requirement?
Just so I can understand, are we talking about like a headquarters that already exists?
Nope, I'm talking about a headquarter that you're trying to champion to come to Kansas, and they say, yes, we'll do it, we'll put you in a star bond district. I'm assuming then that they wouldn't, they'd have to be with other retail entities. They would just be an anchor, because they couldn't be a standalone, because they couldn't fulfill the requirement. Is that
Correct, and you need retail around the headquarters in order for the Star Bonds district to work, correct? And that's why, but one of the main things we are seeing from headquarters is they do want to be located around places where there are things to do, places to stay, so folks can stay nearby. And so we do think that kind of goes hand in hand with a sales pitch and would benefit our state.
The last question is about a clawback or earn-as-you-go opportunity, because I see in the feasibility study that the counties put out, and they often put very wonderful, you know, it's going to do this great, it's going to have this many out-of-state visitors, and then in reality, we don't even know how many out-of-state visitors. And I know we can put something in relating to tracking, but my question to you, what would be the opportunity, or have you seen it in other states where you get an earn-as-you-go payment, that when you meet certain objectives that were defined in the feasibility study, that you now get to claim that portion of that sales tax revenue, so that we're not holding the bag as taxpayers when wonderful, conclusions are drawn in this market studies, feasibility studies, impact studies, and then we find out 3 years later that's not the case, because, and here's the point, the point is that you would say, well, they're still paying off the bonds, their retail sales are still there, but we don't know, except for your cannibalism piece, we don't know if they just didn't shift that money from, 2 miles away. So yes, they paid it off, but would they have anyway? So my question is, have you looked at any earn-as-you-go to go with this, so that we're not paying everything up front, we're paying as they go, as they meet certain benchmarks?
Sure. The thing with that is the challenge is that these bonds are already what you would consider risk bonds. So the bondholder is actually one that's taking the risk on this. If we were to implement that, I do not think we would be able to sell the bonds, and thus we would not be able to have a program, simply because I don't know many bondholders that would be willing to take on the risk of not only being left hanging out to dry if for whatever reason the project did not pay for itself, which to date we have not had that issue, but also on top of the fact of them having to meet these benchmarks as well. That is quite a hefty risk for a bondholder, and I don't know that we would be able to get that done, to be honest with you.
There would definitely have to be guarantees. It would just be through the developer that would guarantee. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Curtis and then Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I do have a question. I do want to say first, though, that a couple of things just in the briefing. I definitely support the headquarters piece. Many of you probably know I worked for Mayor Joe Reardon as his chief of staff when we negotiated as part of the 4-member negotiating team with the unified government when we negotiated the Cerner and Sporting Kansas City project. And the Cerner building and the jobs that it brought to that area, it just really stabilized it really provided the long-term stabilization for that project out there, and it brought other growth with it. So I definitely see the benefit of the headquarters piece and all that it can bring with it. You need that energy, you need that activity to support that retail, and it does bring new dollars. So I definitely can say firsthand, I saw, it wasn't a headquarters, but the Cerner building and the 4,000 jobs that it brought to that area had a great benefit for that project. The other thing that I want to mention real quickly before my question is that I definitely think we need to tie down the definition of the who benefits financially. I definitely am supportive of trying to tie that down. It's too vague. My question, David, to you is on the capital investment piece, the 50 million to 75 million now threshold. I think there's a different threshold, correct, for projects that would happen outside the urban areas. And just let me get to the heart of what my concern is that in Wyandotte County, if we were to look at a project, a star bond project east of 635, and I think there is, some potential there. I'm concerned about that $75 million threshold being met when we're dealing with areas that are perhaps in highly disadvantaged census tracts. So I didn't know if there was any discussion or any thought on, that perhaps there are some areas in our urban areas that would be just as challenged to meet that threshold as in the rural areas. So that's my question, is about that threshold. Thank you.
Sure thing, Representative. I think you bring up a fair point. I'll present to you the challenge that we have is that it's very difficult for us to implement, multiple standards depending on, let's say, each census tract, for example. I mean, there's challenges that go along with it. From our end, in our viewpoint was, 50 million was a number that was set in 2006. We feel that if 50 million could be met in 2006 and 75 million could be met in 2021. It's just, there are challenges for some communities, we agree, and there are other potential areas or other programs that they can use if they can't meet the 75 million, and we can certainly work with those communities to be able to address their needs and what they're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, we do want to make sure we do elevate star bonds to where it's a high threshold to meet, that the project pays, will definitely pay off, and will be a gain to the state as a whole, and the community itself. So that's why we chose to stick with 75 million in urban areas as a whole. But we certainly understand your point, and it is valid.
Representative, could you elaborate a little bit on tie down who benefits? Your concern that you mentioned?
Yeah.
You're on mute right now. Okay, go ahead.
Oops. Sure. I just think that needs to be further defined, because I think when you start going through the scenarios, there could be like family members that could be caught up and implicated in that, that would have, wouldn't be directly benefiting me perhaps, but I just see other scenarios. I think we just need to define it. It's not defined enough as far as like, who would actually, who we're actually talking about that would benefit, that should not benefit. So I just think we need a further definition. I wasn't aware of the peak language. I should be, but I'll look at that. Perhaps that might be a good suggestion for us to, at least a starting point for us to define that better. But I think it's just too loose. It's too wide open.
Okay, yeah, my apologies. I didn't realize you were talking about the Senate amendment. I thought you were talking about the developers, but
yeah.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions, Representative? Nope. Okay. Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And listening to the discussion in reference to corporate headquarters, I don't know what other people are thinking of when they think of corporate headquarters. Maybe they're thinking of a straight-up office building with data processing center and just executives in there. But I would caution us to have a little more open mind in what we're thinking of at a corporate headquarters. You have international companies that would love to have a presence in the United States, let alone Kansas. And I'll just bring up a beverage facility that may be a national draw to a Star Bonds district and could be the anchor and continue to have a development around that would come. Because I do know that there was one proposed years ago, but it didn't fit the criteria. But I will share with you that don't get caught up of just a corporate building with your executive setting and a data processing center, because we do have a lot of manufacturers of sporting goods, and I won't mention all the vendors that we have, but there are large organizations, even in this nation, that if they had a sweet deal to come to a Star Bonds district to meet the needs of their philosophical approach to how they want to treat their employees, a Star Bonds project could allow that to occur, and it could be the hook or the anchor that starts the development. I know earlier in last year's bill, it had the hospital as a research center that could have been an impetus for that. So the ancillary development and retail are important. And if you bring a corporate office into an established retail area, Star Bonds project, remember a lot of these projects are put together in phases. So the first phase will be the hook or the hub. And then the next phase might be part of the retail over here. The next phase may be the hotels that are, so in those phases can change because developers all of a sudden want to be part of a project and they want to see that success initially out of the ground. And remember, Star Bonds is a great way to get the project up and running in a very short amount of time, usually within 3 years, so that you start seeing that return because it encourages them to get to the table with the investments being made with their projects. And so it's one of those things that help us. And I know we talked about the 5-year sunset. Most of these projects take at least 3 years to go through the cycle to get before they start breaking ground. So I would hope that as we're thinking about some of these projects that are already on the table in front of the Department of Commerce, that we don't eliminate them in whatever discussion comes forward, because the agreements have already been, I'm sure, detailed out in the negotiations, just from my past experience and how some of these work. But I'll also state, with all the questions that are being raised, and especially the special interest aspect, I would venture to say that everybody in the state of Kansas has benefited from the Star Bonds project in Wyandotte County, because we've seen an increase in revenue, we've seen an increase in property values, not only just in Wyandotte County, but in the ancillary area bordering our community. So there's ways to always find a way to be critical. We have a Secretary of Commerce that I have worked with a number of them over the years, and it was a leap of faith to trust the Secretary of Commerce to make these decisions. But as I stated yesterday, I don't believe there's a Secretary of Commerce that would go out here and violate the intent of the legislature only to be held accountable by the administration and by 165 different individuals up here and be critical. But that's just my input, Mr. Chairman. I do think that there's opportunity for us to expand this a little bit more, but my concern is that with the questions coming forward, it's important that we at least move this piece of economic development policy forward to the best of our ability.
Thank you for your comments. We could always just stick a dinosaur museum in the middle of the office park and call it a day. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the points of the offices, et cetera, I think it makes sense to have them there. I don't argue with that. I think there are a lot of cases where it has brought value. However, I think it does add another wrinkle to calculating what's incremental, in that if I continue on, I mean, Cerner's a great example of something that has worked well, but those jobs likely would have existed somewhere. The commerce in some part of going out to the area restaurants and other things would exist, and I think it just makes it another need for us to drill deep and say what is incremental. Not that it's a bad part of that entity at all, but in measuring that increment is the concern.
And just to piggyback on that, I don't know if those of you that were on the committee last year, Mr. Eilig did a good job of, he testified on this bill last year. And, he and Mr. Patterson, when they created Cerner, they created it here in Kansas City. And they had offers from all over the country to move their headquarters. And at their own expense, they stayed in Kansas, in Missouri, because their hometown meant that much to them. And so they're to be commended for that. Any other questions? Representative Curtis is up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to clarify that the Cerner jobs that we brought to the Village West area were all net new jobs. They did not exist anywhere else in the Kansas City metropolitan area. That was a requirement of them to build that facility, that we were not bringing jobs from some other place in the metro area. Those were all net new jobs. And that was not, they were carved out of the Starbond district. So the Cerner building is not in the it's not a part of that Starbond. It's located there because of the advantages of being located near all those facilities. But those were all net new jobs. I just don't want any confusion on that.
Any further questions from the committee? Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I look back at the framework for growth, you look at the tools that are in that toolbox, my assumption was that star bonds would be part of that. Now, when I look at my specific example in Manhattan, I understand the investment of $75 million. I think we would be hard-pressed to show $75 million a year of annual gross sales. So while some of these projects may benefit the state at large, I'm having a hard time grasping how it might benefit the cities around the state. You're out in western Kansas, I'm not sure they see the value of the racetrack. It may benefit the state, but not having some flexibility in here worries me a little bit. The other thing I would mention is when I look through here, there are some specifics that I'm not sure need to be in the bill. I don't know why they couldn't be lined out. For example, we have motorsports track mentioned several times, the Wichita Riverwalk mentioned specifically, something about Olathe, and then the exclusion of sales tax on an automobile dealership. So one has to ask, why are these things still in there? Are they needed for the future?
Sure. So the way my understanding is, and this predates me, is that the way this originally worked is the auto racetrack was written into statute. Maybe Representative Burrows might be able to add on this, but the racetrack itself was defined because that was a specific project, and that's why that was in there. With respect to automobile dealers, that relates to a specific project that utilized automobile dealers in order to meet their sales tax requirements. We have no opposition to the fact that that should not be the case. Automobile dealers are not exactly tourist attractions, so to speak. When it comes to retail, for the most part, those are going to be locals that purchase automobiles. And so for that reason, there's a specific exclusion on that because it was part of a previous Star Bonds project, and all parties agreed that that should not really have been the case.
Representative Clayton.
Oh, excuse me, I'm
right,
not sure you answered the $75 million and the distribution around to help grow all of the municipalities across the state.
Right. So again, I do think it's a valid argument. From our end, Manhattan is probably a unique circumstance in that they are a smaller city, and thus the need to meet 75 million or the ability to meet 75 million would certainly be a little bit more difficult than some of the other urban areas. Rural areas are not qualified under the 75 million threshold. If there are considerations that you want an adjustment as far as being able to have it more flexible, I think we're certainly open to it. But from our end, we did try to factor in the fact that it might be difficult for a little bit of cities. But again, much like Representative Curtis, I think it is a valid argument.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Now, Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Soffer, for being here. I think that, again, as we look at Star Bonds and as we look at all of our various packages and our incentive tools, and I'm looking over in testimony of an upcoming conferee, that being my Chamber of Commerce, Overland Park, I think one of the things that I tend to look at, especially as a representative of a border district that is on one side of a metropolitan area that only now has just a slight truce. Do we call the border war a Cold War at this point? Because I think that's a fairly accurate statement on my part. But I think that looking at the corporate headquarters piece in particular, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is not just the net new job creation that the representative from Wyandotte County very accurately brought up, but the fact that even if these districts are within star bonds, it's sort of an if you build it, they will come. And as we start having these jobs created, these people, hopefully with COVID going away, fingers crossed, are going to be utilizing those retail spaces, those entertainment spaces around there. Building a corporate headquarters in the middle of a field, right, where there's no other incentive for those people to spend their money that they earn there, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I really do think that this has been a well looked at and well thought out plan. And more importantly, I know a lot of us don't like incentives. I'm not in love with rural opportunity zones, as many of you know, but I also understand that rural Kansas needs their tools and urban Kansas needs our tools. As far as I'm concerned, we've never stopped fighting against Missouri when it comes to having that development come in. And this is very much a hate the game but don't hate the player standpoint, right? Because if we stop doing it, trust me, the other states are not going to stop doing things like this and offering incentives. And so if we are going to compete and if we're going to keep people coming into our state, which is something that we explore quite a bit in this community, how do we get people in here, then we have to make it a place where people actually want to be here. So I understand that a lot of you might not have districts where corporations want to build their headquarters, but I do, and like you all, I am looking after the best economic interest of the state and building revenue. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for providing a very thorough outlook and really appreciate you answering our questions.
Sure thing.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question. When we're looking at the annual gross revenue for sales tax, so do you feel that right now that majority of all of our current star bonds projects had met the $50 million mark annually in sales tax, in gross sales tax?
Sure. I think those that are on the older side, so those that have had time to kind of develop are fully up and running, I think almost all of them have. There are probably a couple projects that are lagging a little bit behind, and that's why we've implemented a lot of the reforms into our bill to make sure that a much more thorough analysis is done before approving a project. So if there are those that are kind of questionable, we are able to do a much better analysis of those projects.
I just add that on the annual report, something we might consider, there's nothing on here that says the gross sales revenue. So you have to figure out, well, what percentage of sales tax did they have on their project in order for you to figure out if they even met the criteria. So something for our committee to consider. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions for you. On your number 3, non-contiguous districts with the MSAs are prohibited. The changes that Representative Dodson was recognizing earlier, would that affect that?
It could. Again, I mean, if you wanted to make it MSA definition as of today, I mean, I think that's fine. Really, the effect it would have is mostly on Manhattan. It wouldn't necessarily affect the Wichita region or the Johnson County, Kansas City region, but some of our smaller MSAs, there could potentially be an impact specifically on the non-contiguous part, yes.
So we could call it something different and define it differently in order to appease both parties?
Again, I mean, it's difficult, right? I guess you could put a city population by, a certain amount, depending on kind of what we're looking at now with MSAs. So there could be we could do it that way, or we could simply state that MSAs as of, whenever this bill passes, and that's the cutoff date, that's what we will consider. Because the expectation on the federal side is even if they were to approve it, which hopefully they won't, but even if they would, we're still a ways away from that happening. It's simply a proposal that's up for public comment at the moment.
Okay, and then one of the issues that kind of popped up yesterday that we didn't quite have an answer for, I was wondering if you were able to find out when the 10%, the extra 10%, or I guess when the baseline was drawn, Is that from the approval date of the Star Bond, or is that from placed into service date of the Star Bond?
Sure. So I do think I mentioned it in my comments, but just in case I want to clarify. So it is as of the approval date itself of the project.
So in particular, the Star Bond project that's located at 159th and 69 Highway, that has yet to be approved, is that correct?
It's approved. The bonds have not technically been issued, so it's not officially final, but it's pretty close to that, yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of building going on in that area, and there is no Star Bond project that's even broken ground there. So how does that work? All these restaurants that were built over the last several months, do they start at zero because they were built after?
No, they don't necessarily start at zero. So again, you would take the last 12 months. So at that point, and then kind of set that as the baseline. So if they've built 2 years ago, then again, you'd look at the last 12 months. If they've built within the last 12 months, you would look at kind of what the sales tax was during that period of time and then average it out.
Well, I guess from what date? I mean, they started building immediately once those on and off ramps went in on 159th Street. And that's what spurred the development for that area. Then we have an approval for a Star Bond district that happened kind of in the middle of things. And so I guess if the Star Bond was approved while construction was being done on those restaurants, that means that the baseline is zero on those restaurants that were going to be built either way.
Correct, but you also have to
quite a bit of
remember
business.
that when you build the attraction, there will be a lot more visitors there. And so if the restaurant is not up and running currently with no attraction, then it's very difficult to figure out what the baseline might be once there is an attraction and figuring out what that difference is.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, and I'm seeing no further questions for you, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to mix things up a little bit and call on one of our virtual conferees. Corb Maxwell is with us. He's a very expensive attorney, and I don't want him to be charging his clients by the hour for waiting in line, so let's go ahead and bump him up. Corb, if you're out there.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that consideration, and I know my clients appreciate it as well. Chairman Tarwater, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in favor of Star Bond reauthorization and as a proponent of Senate Bill 124. I'll be very brief, as I know there's been excellent testimony by the Department of Commerce that Representative Burrows did a great job yesterday, and many on this committee are very, very familiar with Star Bonds from the many years we've worked on it. But I just want to rise in support of them to say Star Bonds are one of the most powerful tools, if not the most powerful tool for economic development in Kansas. And they played a huge role in the about face of Wyandotte County. It began more than 20 years ago with the Kansas Speedway, and Star Bonds have continued to spur and stimulate other surrounding and supportive development, including the Village West Star Bond project that as of early 2020 had created 11,000 jobs, $7 million of new state income tax. And then this number is just shocking, $42 million in annual sales tax revenue for the state. $42 million of state sales tax is generated every year out of that district. Projects made possible because of Star Bonds include everything from Nebraska Furniture Mart, the Legends, Cabela's, Sporting Kansas City, Children's Mercy Park, and the U.S. National Training Center. The impact of Star Bonds isn't just limited to Wyandotte County, however. This tool has also produced substantial and positive results elsewhere in the state, including Garden City, Dodge City, Salina, Hutchinson, Wichita, Derby, and Goddard, to name a few. All of these projects have driven additional economic development in Kansas and helped to provide new opportunities for many of our communities. My firm is incredibly proud to have worked closely with this committee, the legislature as a whole, the governor, multiple local governments, and many other interested stakeholders in seeing all of these projects to fruition. Above all else, Star Bonds provide an important competitive advantage. The physical tourism and major business attractions of Kansas are few and far between. We do have a great business climate, however, and some of the strongest public-private partnerships like Star Bonds that are the envy of other states. I have been involved with numerous projects across the country and spoken about Kansas development incentives in a number of other jurisdictions around the country. Many other legislators and governors are envious of this tool. They realize that this tool is about investing in our future now in order to realize tangible and substantial benefits down the road. I thank the chairman for bringing this up and ask all of the members of the committee to forward this on for consideration and approval so that we can reauthorize Star Bonds and continue doing the great work we've been doing for many, many years. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll stand for any questions the committee may have on any of the particular provisions or any of the projects that we've been involved and worked in over the number of years.
Thanks, Corb, for your testimony. And all kidding aside, I do realize you're very busy, and so we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, is there, you heard some of the previous questions. Did you care to weigh in on any of that as far as business parks and such?
Yeah, I guess I would say, Mr. Chairman, that obviously we're supportive of the expansion of any economic development tools in Kansas. I know we can then put those to good use and work and effect in bringing business and jobs and attractions to Kansas, but I also understand it's the prerogative of the legislature to debate and decide whether that makes sense. I'm happy to go into any of the other issues out there. There were numerous ones raised, and happy to speak to any of them from a practitioner's standpoint if any of the members of the committee have any questions about them. I would note that I agree with much of the testimony about that the Senate amendment that was added on is very confusing. It's very vague. I think that will be very hard for local governments and those of you in the legislature to steer clear of. So defining that down or just pulling that out of the act, I think would be a benefit to all for having clear rules in this process.
Oh, sorry, Representative Curtis has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Corp, for being here. I was just wondering, I know there's been a lot of questions about the headquarter provision in there. Could you offer some insight in how you feel that piece plays, along with the whole Star Bond development?
So thanks, Representative Curtis. I remember working with you and all of that group on when we brought Cerner and Children's Mercy Park to the unified government. And that very much was an issue that we confronted, is that we had done such a great job of developing Village West, but we saw no lunchtime traffic, and we had lots of restaurants that were couldn't maintain it because they were busy all through the weekends, but they had no business during the week. And so the addition of things like Dairy Farmers of America and Cerner out there, and now Urban Outfitters and some of the other industrial development we're doing in the area, it's strength upon strength, right? Development begets development and is helpful. And so I think it's a positive tool to give that the secretary can end up having the ability to use this to attract more jobs to Kansas. That's the very purpose of this committee and the very purpose of the Department of Commerce as a whole. But I also understand that there's reservations about economic and private-public partnerships tools that some of the conferees and some of the committee has, and some in the legislature and others have. So it's a delicate balance that everybody has to strike and work through. Just on our side, as long as there's clear rules that are laid out, we're going to work on behalf of developers and companies to bring additional economic development all throughout the state of Kansas. So we appreciate the work of this committee of just trying to lay out clear rules for us to operate under and go out and create business and jobs for the state.
Seeing no further questions, thanks, Corb, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Moving on, we'll go to Trey Cocking, the League of Kansas Municipalities. Welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you for allowing us to testify today on this. Star bonds are important. I think, I'm going to call him Commissioner Dotson, Mayor Dotson. hit on the importance of Manhattan. I'll also tell you, I worked personally on a Star Bonds project in Atchison that was the smallest Star Bond project that's been authorized so far. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. A lot of hoops have already been put in place, but as we tried to get that small project, $2.3 million is the total amount of Star Bonds on that project, on a $10 million project. It was very difficult to get it to go, just trying to follow all those hoops. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a great project in Atchison when the project's complete, and I'm excited for it. And I'll answer any questions that you guys might have about that. So I think Star Bonds are a very valuable tool. I'm very concerned with the amendment that the Senate put on direct and indirect benefits from it. I was a city manager. Every year I got to go into executive session with the commission, and they asked me about my goals. They asked me about how we did. And, you know, when I worked on the Star Bond project, that was part of my performance, was how's the Star Bond project coming? What was your role in the Star Bond project? You know, and every year in Atchison, I did receive a raise. So I would have fairly directly benefited from a Star Bond project via raise from having worked on it as somebody. The next place I will take you is we had a dentist who was on our city commission. Say we have a workers' comp accident and somebody injures their teeth, and they're taken to the closest dentist, and the dentist fixes their teeth, and then he bills the workers' comp. He has now benefited from the Star Bonds project. Same for an emergency room. Dr. Epley works in the emergency room from time to time. So if he worked on somebody who was at the Star Bonds project and got injured, he's potentially now violating this law. I'm also concerned about subcontractors. You know, there are a number of commissioners and legislators who own businesses. If they can't benefit, you lower the pool, especially in some place like Atchison. You know, we had a commissioner who was a plumber. If he can't bid on those jobs, it lowers the pool of people, and it makes the project potentially more expensive, especially if they're taking bids to get the job done. It's not like he's getting a kickback or anything. You can see exactly how that lays out and what X company bid and what his company bid. So I am concerned about that. And then I think David hit the point. You know, we're concerned that, especially in a small town like Atchison, our Star Bond district, quite frankly, our commissioner with the dentist office is, you can hit it with a rock from the Star Bond district. Does this make his property more valuable? I don't know, but I'm concerned that if it does, now he can't sell his property or he's going to benefit off the Star Bond. So I'm concerned how that works out. So I think there's a much better way to do that amendment than what was done on the Senate floor, and I would urge this body to take a good look at that before passing this out. But overall, Star Bonds are very positive, and I really like that this has been geared towards the small projects in the non-urban area, and I think that will benefit across the state of Kansas. And I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Craig. Committee, any questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. Next up is Kevin Walker from the Overland Park Chamber.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Walker, Overland Park Chamber. You have had a lot of testimony already that really gets into the nuts and bolts of the Star Bond program. I think that's a valuable conversation. Last year and years before, we've been very supportive of the transparency efforts that this legislature has undertaken. We think if we're going to have economic development tools in this state, they need to be as effective and as powerful as they possibly can be. So we certainly welcome that review. We certainly welcome you looking at the policies to make sure that these programs are effective. And certainly Star Bonds is an effective tool. There are improvements that are proposed in this legislation that we think are valuable. You've heard a lot of examples already of Star Bond projects that have produced tremendous benefits for the state and for the communities in which they're located. There are some projects out there that may not be as fruitful as we would hope they would be. And I think as we continue to work through this process, we can make sure that all future Star Bonds programs are as effective and provide a great benefit and return on investment for the taxpayers. And that's why we think the provisions of this bill are very helpful. You know, bottom line, people disparagingly refer to Kansas as flyover country. I think some of us are fine with that. We love it here. We want Kansas to be as strong and as economically powerful as we possibly can make it. But we need these incentive tools to be able to lure companies here to grow our economy. I think that's something we all share, whether we're in the legislature or whether we're working for cities or whether we're economic development professionals. We all agree that we need to grow and expand our economy. And I think Star Bonds absolutely helps us achieve that goal. I think the improvements that are proposed in this bill are effective in making it better, and certainly would encourage you to support this legislation as it moves forward.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, Mr. Walker? Seeing none, thanks so much. Mike Taylor with the Unified Government of Wyandotte County. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Most of you have heard my story about the success of Village West. I know Representative Burrows talked about that. Corb Maxwell just addressed some of the numbers. We produced one number I want to give you, so I don't want to repeat all that. It's all in my testimony. There were $450 million in Star Bonds invested in the Village West area. That produced $1.4 billion in private investment. I wish my 401k did that well. We paid those bonds off 5 years ahead of schedule because of the success of the development. So I want you to keep that in mind. We've also generated hundreds of luxury apartment units that came directly because of the development and the Cerner complex and the Dairy Farmers complex. We're getting ready to build 300 more apartment units at the Legend because that area has now become very popular to live in. And it's all because of the Legends and the Star Bond project. So there is, the other thing I'll mention is we've got a lot of peripheral development that came because of the Star Bond district. That wasn't part of Star Bonds, but it came because of the success. So the Super Walmart, the Sam's Club, a host of restaurants that built across the street that had nothing to do with Star Bonds, but they came because of the, and I think Representative Burrows used the word synergy, that was generated by that area. We've built hundreds of single-family homes. I mean, that area was nothing. As was mentioned yesterday, there was a liquor store and a Kentucky Fried Chicken out there prior to all this being built. So it was a huge success. It paid off early, and I think it's been a real benefit to the state of Kansas. I know we're running short on time, so I want to address a couple of things that I heard the committee talk about. One is on the third-party feasibility study. And I think it's great that Commerce is doing that. We pioneered that. Wyandotte County did that on our own from the very first project, the Speedway project. We hired a third-party financial analyst to evaluate that project for us. They worked for us, not the developer, because my boss didn't want to trust what the developer necessarily said. He wanted to have an independent evaluation of that. And the way they do that is they look and they would give us a high number and say, you know, if this development is super successful, we think it'll do this. If it's okay, it'll do this, and if it falls short, it'll do this. And we always used the conservative numbers when we would put together those proposals and do those bonds. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think it's great that's being done, but we did it first in Wyandotte County, and it served us well. The other point is on the cannibalism, because I've heard this criticism for years. So we brought in Nebraska Furniture Mart, which is a major destination. It was an out-of-state company that we were able to recruit. And I will tell you that the Furniture Mall of Kansas, which there's one here in Topeka, there's also a huge one in Olathe. And it advertises all the time. It's doing great. Didn't cannibalize anything. And right down the street from Nebraska Furniture Mart is a really small, locally owned business called Home Rooms. And it fits a whole different niche. And it's booming as well. So the fact that Nebraska Furniture came in, oh, by the way, in 4 locations in the metro area, there's a company called Crowley Furniture. Nebraska Furniture Mart didn't kill anybody, and they're all working, they're all successful. So I kind of want to object to the cannibalism argument. And I want to address one other thing here while we're talking about the auto dealers, because I know that's also been a point of contention. 3 of those dealerships were brand new businesses brought in from out of state, from Florida and from Texas. They were brand new businesses to Kansas. The other one, the Ford dealership, moved from Bonner Springs, one of our neighboring cities, into our district. And yeah, I guess you could say, well, that's cannibalism, except Victory Ford was about to lose their franchise because they were only selling 30 cars a month in Bonner Springs. When they moved into that new auto dealership area, they started selling over 100 cars a month. And the old location they left in Bonner Springs, a high-end used car dealer moved in, so it filled that slot too. So we actually created a whole nother business and saved one that was going to go out of business. So I just want to give you some of that background on the auto dealerships because I know that's been kind of criticized somewhat. The other thing I'll say is, as I wrap up, because I know we're running long on time, we do have concerns about the $75 million in retail sales. We've had no trouble doing that with the Legends, but as Representative Curtis mentioned, I think that if we do something east of 635 in the older parts of the city, that could be a really high benchmark to meet in terms of $75 million in retail sales. The other one, as you've heard repeatedly from a number of folks, is this benefit, indirect or direct benefit to an elected official, whether it's one of you or whether it's one of my commissioners. I don't know what that provision means. What does that exactly mean? And Mr. Cocking gave you some examples of what that could mean. I think if that's going to stay in there, it needs to be better defined. But other than that, we encourage the renewal of STAR bonds. We think it's been an amazing tool, and I won't, again, you can read my testimony, I won't rehash all of that. Oh, one other quick thing, Representative Williams. On the sales tax origin, you asked. So while the bonds are still being paid off, all the sales tax stays in the district. Once the bonds are paid off, then it goes to the communities where the furniture or whatever is delivered. But as long as the bonds are still in place, all the revenues stay with the district to pay off the bonds. I hope that answers the question you were asking. So now, if you live in Lenexa and you buy some furniture and you have it delivered, the sales tax follows you to Lenexa. But when the bonds were still in place, it stayed there to pay off the bonds. Any other questions? I know we're running out of time.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the feasibility studies. You said you paid for your own. The way it's written is the Commerce Department will choose the individual and the developer will pay for it, but they're in charge of it. You're saying you don't trust that system, or how would you change it?
Well, no, I'm saying what we did initially was we selected our own financial firm and we actually paid for it up front. Now, I think ultimately probably the developer ended up paying for it on the back end, but we wanted it to be third party, as independent as we possibly could, so that we got an evaluation that was representing us and not the developer.
But the bill is being written, so would you change it or leave it the way it is?
I'd need to look at it again and see. I think it's fine that Commerce recommends, and I think the way the bill is written, the developer ends up paying for it in the end, I believe. But we actually hired the financial firm to do the evaluation. But
Yeah, I think he kind of played the role of what the secretary is going to do now. So they're the city, and they hired the feasibility study, and but they paid for it. This way, the Department of Commerce will choose the third party, and the developer will foot the bill for it. Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Representative Curtis.
I'm just full of questions today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, you kind of hit on what my original question was to David Sofer about the capital investment, and my concern, because there is potential for us to get a project with the historic sites that we have on the eastern part of the county, but I'm worried about that $75 million threshold being met. I gather that you perhaps may share that concern, that it would make a project east of 635 maybe not viable because it couldn't meet that threshold. And do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how we might improve on that?
well, I think, and I understand the difficulty that Commerce might have with this, but I think we're almost kind of a tale of two cities in KCK. East of 635 is inner city, lower income. Out west, which most of you may be familiar with, is the Legends and the Speedway and all of that. I think trying to develop something east of 635 or around the historic Quindaro site, for example, would almost be like trying to develop something in a smaller rural community. It's not true out west, but it probably is true in our inner cities. So if there would be some way to distinguish that, and I'm not necessarily proposing that, but I do see, along with Representative Curtis, an issue with the $75 million in retail sales.
Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to Jason Watkins from the Wichita Chamber. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Watkins, appearing on behalf of the Wichita Regional Chamber. I think most of the ground has been plowed, so I'll just quickly say this has been an important tool to the South Central Kansas economy. We've had several Star Bonds projects that we benefited from, so we would urge the committee to reauthorize it. We're also supportive of restrictions to make sure that the program is used in the proper way, and that taxpayers are protected. I do want to quickly weigh in on the Senate amendment, although I might regret it. Some difficulty putting those types of restrictions on citizen legislators. There was a member of the Senate that asked a question, said if I am an electrician and the electrical firm that I work for gets contracted to go do work, would I not be allowed to? And the answer to that was yes. And so I think that does create difficulties. You are a citizen legislature. It creates additional difficulties when you're paying yourselves exactly what you paid me when I left here because I was going broke in 2009. So just in fairness to yourselves, I think you might consider removing that Senate amendment. Happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Seeing no questions, thank you, sir. We'll move on to Mayor Hunter Larkin from Goddard, Kansas.
Yes, I first would like to say hi and thank the committee. I know I only have a little bit of time, but my name is Hunter Larkin. I'm the mayor of Goddard, Kansas. As the mayor of a growing town with a Star Bond, I'm so thankful that we have a program in Kansas that allows communities to build amazing attractions like we have in Goddard, Kansas. The development that we have coming in Goddard provides full-size Olympic swimming pools, splash pads with other water features, 5 full turf ball fields with a Genesis Health Club, hotel, and daycare facilities. A complex like this is a great benefit to the city just by the sheer volume of people that's going to be coming in and out of Goddard. That's something that our community's never seen before. I do have a few questions in regard to the transparency and accountability of Star Bonds. When I first started working for the city of Goddard, I started doing some digging into our original deal, and I can send this to the chairman and to the committee if you guys would like. I would like to ask a question, and maybe someone might have an answer for me on the original purchase of ground. Back in 2014, September of 2014, the ground that our Star Bond is on was purchased for $2.5 million, almost $2.6 million by a Rick Warner and the Goddard Destination Development Group. And I'm trying to figure out, because that is not the true development group. Then it was sold to Rodney Stephen for Goddard Sports LLC. I'm trying to figure out how come a purchase of ground can then be sold to a next developer while the ground was used to be purchased with Star Bond funds. Going there, I mean, we've got a great development going on in Goddard. I think it's amazing what Mr. Stephen is doing is absolutely great. It's bringing in a vast majority of people that's going to help other development grow. But then there was another topic that got brought up yesterday while I was listening to it. to you guys is the expansion on like commercial office parks, office spaces. One concern that I see is the question is, how is it going to get paid off? And what I've noticed with my star bond out in Goddard is that they redraw the districts to add in other sales tax, like retail centers. I have a Walmart in Goddard that was already established, and they added it in to the star bond district. And that's what's really floated the bonds by. So how are you going to build in an office park or an office complex and making sure that you're not taking already existing sales tax dollars? So that's all the questions I have. I really just want to make sure that people understand I am for star bonds. I think they're a great economic tool for the community, and it's definitely helping out Goddard, but I just want to make sure that the Kansas taxpayer is getting a fair and reasonable deal.
Hey, thank you for your questions, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Time constraints are such that we won't be able to get you those answers today, but we will get you those answers. And if you're, we'll discuss that at the beginning when we start to work this bill. And so if you tune in, then we'll get you your answers then, and we'll also get them emailed to you. Any questions for the mayor?
No questions, I guess.
Representative Curtis, you're up.
Well, actually, I just forgot to lower my hand, so sorry about that, but I certainly appreciate your perspective on your experience in Goddard. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your time today, sir. I think that's the last proponent that we have in person or online. There are, on the S drive, there are written proponents for the Olathe Chamber, the City of Olathe, Travel Industry Association of Kansas, the Kansas City Chamber, City of Wichita, Overland Park City Hall, Travel Industry Associations of Kansas. So those are in the S drive. You should review those. I will now go to there are no neutrals, so I'm going to go to the opponent testimony, and that would be Elizabeth Patton for Americans for Prosperity.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to testify in front of committee today. My name is Elizabeth Patton. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Kansas. We just wanted to spend some time today to address some concerns we have with star bonds and this bill to expand and extend them. I know we're running short on time, so I will try to be brief with my testimony. I know you have my written testimony in front of you as well, and I would be happy to follow up with the committee further at the end of this as well. And the gist of it is economic development programs such as this one. We spent a lot of time last year hearing about the problems that were ultimately created with many of these programs. We believe at their core, incentive programs such as this create an unfair advantage for a few privileged businesses and developers, in which in turn unfairly costs other businesses and their workers and imposes costs on taxpayers that are unnecessary. It was said earlier that this program that we have is the envy of other states. And if that is the case, we don't believe that what we have seen as a result of the multiple projects with the Star Bond program, I don't think that comment quite gets us to where we are in the results that we've seen to date. An analysis in Wisconsin concluded that whenever a new development takes place in a district, such as we are discussing today, that the community will experience either higher taxes or reduced services. I can cite some additional studies. They are also in my written testimony. Really, the gist of what I want to say today is that if the risk is too great for private capital, it's probably not the right bet for hardworking taxpayers either. Before extending the Star Bonds program, which I do expect to happen during this session, I understand that is most likely going to be the will of the body. We do ask that lawmakers and the public demand more robust accountability and transparency for both existing and future star bond projects. There are 3 in particular that I won't go into detail right now, but we would like to see increased transparency, better funding limits, and additional oversight than what is provided in the current bill today. It does include one minor reform currently that would be better than current law. For new projects, the bill would cap the portion of state sales tax increment revenue that can be pledged at 90%. However, a better reform would be to completely eliminate state sales tax funding for star bonds altogether. Ultimately, this bill would extend and expand corporate welfare at the expense of Kansas taxpayers. And with these concerns in mind, I respectfully ask that you do allow the Kansas Star Bonds program to expire, and instead of corporate welfare, that we look at other ways to grow our Kansas economy and make this a place for us to have long-term investment. Thank you. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you for your testimony. You mentioned cannibalization.
I did, yes.
Have you done any, like, you have proof of that? Do you have any kind of studies that you've done that you can get to us?
I do. I have several that I can provide that look at it even from a national perspective. And here in Kansas, we believe there are examples of cannibalism that have either happened or are currently happening to businesses around where star bonds exist currently. I would be happy to provide the committee with that in more depth.
Okay, committee, any questions? And so your written, I haven't looked at your written testimony, but you have some examples in there as well.
I do have some cited. I think I can add some additional to that as well, so I'll send a follow-up with some additional data that we have related to maybe even Kansas specifics.
Okay, I don't see any other questions for you. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, appreciate it.
We have one other opponent testimony, and that is written only, and that's in the S drive. It's from Kansas Policy Institute. They couldn't be with us today. They had they were tied up, so they kind of got late notice about this meeting, so please look at that. With that, I'm going to close the hearing on SB 124. Yes. And committee, tomorrow I think we have a few bills that we're going to be hearing. I am going to add, I believe it's SB 90 to that, and I'll make that announcement tomorrow, and you'll get that in the email tonight. We can get that. I think it's SB 90. Is that right, David? Okay. We're going to add that. It should be, I'm told it'll be a quick hearing, so we can get all these out tomorrow. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.